Imagine being completely alone for 18 years on a windswept island in the middle of the Pacific. No friends, no family, no tools, just the relentless roar of the ocean, the biting wind, and the crushing silence of a world that forgot you existed. This was Isla's life. When the ship that was supposed to take her away vanished over the horizon, she became the last living voice of her people, forced to survive storms, hunger, and solitude in a place where only the cleverest, strongest, and most determined could endure. This is not a story of escape. It's a story of endurance, of memory, and what it truly takes to remain human when the world disappears. Imagine a woman standing alone on the edge of the world, where the Pacific Ocean crashes relentlessly against jagged cliffs, and the wind carries nothing but the salt of the sea. For her, there is no one to call for help, no one to laugh with, no one to cry with, no promise that another human will ever return. This woman is Isla, and in the year 1835, she became the last person left on a tiny, barren island, abandoned by her people, forgotten by the world, and forced to survive in a place that was both beautiful and unforgiving. San Nicolas Island is no ordinary place. It stretches long and narrow into the Pacific, shaped by centuries of wind, water, and isolation. Its cliffs drop sharply into restless seas, while its low vegetation bends beneath constant gales and salt spray. Fresh water is scarce. Shelter is almost non-existent. And yet for thousands of years, humans had lived here, thriving against all odds. The Nicolino people were masters of this harsh environment. They fished in kelp forests, harvested abalone from tidal pools, hunted seals on rocky beaches, and built seaworthy vessels capable of navigating treacherous open waters. They had survived isolation for centuries, passing knowledge from generation to generation. But all of this would unravel in a single moment. By the early 19th century, outsiders arrived. Russian fur traders hunted sea otters, bringing violence and disease. Missionaries came with promises of protection, but their actions were careless and chaotic. The Nicolino people, once self-sufficient and strong, were cornered. Their numbers dwindled. Their society, carefully balanced over centuries, teetered on the edge of collapse. In 1835, a decision was made to relocate the survivors to the mainland. Spanish missionaries sent a single schooner to collect the remaining people. The operation was hurried, disorganized, and the storm clouds were gathering overhead. Families scrambled aboard with whatever they could carry. And in the chaos, one figure was left behind, Isla. Why she remained is a mystery. Perhaps she was overlooked. Perhaps she had lingered, searching for a missing child. Perhaps it was fate. Whatever the reason, the ship sailed away, and Isla was left completely alone. Standing there, she could only watch as the ship disappeared beyond the horizon. No one called her name. No one waved goodbye. She was utterly alone. For the first time, she felt the chilling weight of total isolation. At that moment, survival was no longer about skill or tradition. It was about sheer human will. Some accounts suggest that Isla had a young son with her for a short time, perhaps until he drowned in the treacherous waters while trying to reach the departing ship. If true, the loss was absolute, leaving her not just alone in the world, but stripped of every human bond. Every day from that moment would test her body, her mind, and her spirit in ways few could imagine. Isla had no tools, no weapons, no shelter beyond what nature offered. The island itself was both adversary and teacher. She scavenged what she could, branches, driftwood, shells. She learned quickly that exposure meant death, that even a single night without shelter could be fatal. Every gust of wind, every wave crashing onto beach, reminded her that the world she knew had vanished. Hunger was constant. Water was scarce. She collected rain in shallow rock pools, rationing every drop. Shellfish became a primary food source. As did fish, she could catch with crude hooks fashioned from bone. She learned to move silently across the island, avoiding dangerous terrain, seeking whatever sustenance the sea or land would offer. And all the while, she wondered, would anyone ever return? But survival was more than a physical challenge. The mind is fragile under isolation. For humans, social interaction is as essential as food and water. Without it, the mind begins to fold in on itself. Hallucinations, despair, and madness are common. Isla endured. She sang the songs of her people, learned in childhood to keep her voice alive. She spoke aloud to herself, perhaps to animals or unseen spirits. She carved marks in sticks and rocks to measure time, a simple, human attempt to maintain order in a world that no longer acknowledged her existence. Every small ritual became a lifeline, a way to preserve her humanity when no one else could reflect it back. One night, a violent storm swept across the island. Rain lashed against her shelter. Winds tore at the bones and branches she had assembled. She huddled inside, clutching whatever protection she could find. The sea roared like a living creature, as if testing her, challenging her right to exist. She survived by firelight, through sheer will and resourcefulness. That night and many nights after taught her that endurance was as much about patience and observation as it was about strength. The island demanded mastery of its rhythms, its dangers, and its gifts. Weeks turned into months, months into years. Slowly, Isla adapted. She learned the seasons, the tides, the movements of birds and fish. The island, once a prison, became her classroom and her world. Every day was still a struggle, every night still lonely, but she survived. She fashioned better shelters from driftwood and whale bones, learned to stitch bird feathers into clothing, and sharpened tools from stone. Every act was deliberate, precise. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a student of the island, an engineer, a hunter, and a guardian of a culture that the world thought had vanished. At this point, Isla is no longer merely a woman left behind. She is a force of endurance, living day by day in a world stripped of human companionship. She doesn't know how long she will remain alone, or whether anyone will ever find her, but she has learned one truth. To survive here, she must rely on nothing but herself, her skills, and her memory. The island is unforgiving, but has also become her refuge. And as the sun sets over the cliffs, painting the ocean red, one question lingers in the silence. How long can a single human survive when the world has forgotten him entirely? The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months. Isla's body, once trembling with fear and uncertainty, grew stronger. Her hands, raw and calloused, learned to fashion tools from stone and bone. Every stick, every sharp shell, every piece of driftwood became a weapon, a tool, or a container for water and food. The island that had once seemed like a prison slowly revealed itself as a teacher. She learned the rhythm of tides, the movement of fish, and the patterns of birds. She could read the wind, the clouds, and the scent of the sea, predicting storms long before the first raindrops fell. Food was a constant concern. Shellfish clung stubbornly to rocks, abalone hid in tidal pools, and the occasional bird or seal required strategy and patience. Isla discovered that drying fish in the wind preserved them for days, even weeks, and that certain edible roots and greens could survive the island's harsh sun if harvested at the right moment. Water, the scarcest of all resources, became a sacred commodity. She collected every drop of rainfall, stored in hollowed-out shells or in shallow basins carved into rock. Every drop was precious, every misstep potentially fatal. Survival was no longer just a hope. It was a calculation, a science she slowly mastered. Her shelters evolved. The first crude lean-tos made of sticks and grasses were replaced by more elaborate structures. She discovered the skeleton of a beach whale and used its massive ribs to build a semi-permanent home, filling gaps with earth, seaweed, and grass. She learned to position these structures to avoid the worst of the wind, to catch sunlight in winter and stay cool in the summer. Each night, she inspected the shelters carefully, repairing what had been damaged by the wind, reinforcing what could be destroyed in the next storm. Every action was deliberate, every decision measured. She was no longer reacting to the island. She was shaping it, in subtle ways, to support her survival. And yet, survival demanded more than skill. The greatest challenge was not the wind or the waves, nor the scarcity of food and water. It was the silence. Complete isolation weighs on the mind in ways few can imagine. The absence of other human voices, laughter, argument, or song forces the mind inward, folding over itself until hallucinations can feel real and despair can become a constant companion. Isla fought this quietly. She sang the songs of her childhood, tunes passed down through her people, melodies she had thought she might forget. She spoke aloud to herself, to the birds, perhaps the spirits of the island she could not see. Every word, every note, every chant was a thread anchoring her to her humanity. She carved marks in sticks and rocks, measuring days, weeks, and seasons. The act of counting, of marking, of observing, became a small rebellion against the erasure of her world. Each ritual was a quiet affirmation. She existed, she remembered, she mattered. Winter brought its own challenges. Rain and fog seeped into every shelter, chilling her to the bone. Storms battered the cliffs and washed away parts of the shore she had come to depend on. She discovered that seaweed could be used as insulation, that moss could protect her feet, that certain grasses burned brighter and longer than others. Every innovation was born of necessity, but necessity also bred ingenuity. She became adept at predicting animal behavior. Seals hauled onto beaches at predictable times. Birds nested in particular spots, and fish swam close to shore when the tides were right. She observed, remembered, and adapted. The island spoke to her in patterns, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, she learned its language. Her survival was no longer a question of luck. It was the product of intelligence, observation, and experience. And yet, even as she mastered her environment, the loneliness gnawed at her. There were moments when the wind carried voices she could not place, when shadows on the rocks became figures from her past. She remembered the faces of her family, her people, the children she might have known. The memory of her lost son, if he had indeed existed, haunted her in quiet, persistent ways. Some nights she imagined conversations that never happened, negotiating the past, asking questions that would remain unanswered. Small victories became milestones. The first successful hunting of a seal with a sharpened bone spear. The first shelter built that withstood an entire season's storm. The first time she collected enough food and water to last a week. These victories were both survival and ritual, proof that she could endure, that she could continue to live when the world had stopped looking for her. Over time, Isla began to feel a strange companionship with the animals of the island. Seals became familiar presences, birds curious observers, and fish a reflection of her patience. She spoke to them, sometimes in her own language, sometimes in silence, and felt a faint echo of connection. She was alone, but not entirely without witnesses. The seasons repeated themselves again and again, and with them came a deeper understanding of the island's rhythms. Storms, once terrifying, became challenges to prepare for. The tides, once threatening, became guides. She developed a calendar of sorts, using the sun, the moon, and the birds to mark time. Each day, she honed her skills, her routines becoming precise, almost ceremonial. Her tools, once crude, became works of practical art. Stone blades were sharpened to near perfection. Bone needles stitched together feathers and hides with meticulous care. She repaired, reshaped, and replaced every tool as it wore down. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was left to chance. The island's survival demanded mastery, and she had begun to achieve it. Yet the question of rescue or human contact remained. On rare occasions, she glimpsed distant ships or signs of human activity, but they never came close. The mystery of whether the world still existed beyond the horizon became a constant companion. Every day brought hope and fear intertwined. Would someone find her, or was she destined to remain the last witness of her people? Her solitude, while crushing at times, became her crucible. It tested not just her body, but her mind, her spirit, her very identity. Each act of survival, each day she endured, reinforced something deeper than mere life. She preserved the knowledge, the songs, the skills, and the memory of a people that history seemed determined to erase. By the end of her second year alone, Isla was no longer merely a survivor. She had become a master of the island, a silent observer of nature, and a guardian of a vanished culture. She had transformed fear into discipline, loneliness into ritual, and isolation into knowledge. Yet the question lingered. How long could she continue? How long could a human endure when the world had truly forgotten them? And still, she sang, she stitched, she carved. She endured day after day, season after season, building not just shelters and tools, but a life defined not by rescue, not by others, but by her own resilience, ingenuity, and determination. The island had claimed her solitude, but she had claimed mastery. And in that quiet struggle, a story was being written, one that the world would one day barely recognize, but one that carried the full weight of survival, memory, and human endurance. Years had passed, and the island, once a hostile and unyielding adversary, had become Isla's domain. Every tide, every gust of wind, every shadow cast by the cliffs, she knew with intimate familiarity. She could track the movements of fish by the color of the water, predict storms by the smell of the air, and follow the flight of birds to hidden sources of food. Each skill, once learned in fear and necessity, had become instinct. The island spoke to her in a language she alone understood. Her shelters were no longer temporary refuges, but carefully planned homes, adapted to every season and wind direction. She had built one using the massive ribs of a beached whale, reinforced with driftwood and earth, high enough to withstand winter storms. Another, lighter and mobile, could be dismantled and moved when the cliffs were threatened by erosion or the tides threatened to flood low areas. Her clothing, stitched from bird feathers and seal skins with painstaking care, using bone needles, protected her from both sun and cold. She had mastered the art of making fire from stones, preserving food in the sun and wind, and improvising tools from what the island offered. But mastery of the physical world could not shield her from the weight of silence. For nearly a decade, she had lived with no other human voice, no human touch, no shared memory or story. Her songs, the ones she sang from memory of her people, became her companions. She sang to herself, to the wind, to the seals lounging on the beach. Sometimes she imagined sound carrying over the ocean, reaching ears that would never hear them. At times, she spoke aloud to the spirits of her ancestors, asking questions she knew would go unanswered. Time, once measured by days and nights, now passed in cycles of survival. She counted seasons instead of years, marking them in the carvings on driftwood, notches that were invisible to anyone but herself. She knew when the first rains would arrive, when the kelp would be thickest, when the seals would haul out in largest numbers. She had become one with the rhythms of the island. The island had shaped her as much as she had shaped her life upon it. Yet the memory of her people haunted her. The faces, the voices, the stories, they lingered, fading slowly, like a fire whose embers are barely visible in the dark. She was the last living memory of a culture that had been all but erased by outsiders, disease, and displacement. Often, in moments of quiet reflection, she wondered if she was the only one left who could carry these stories, the only one left to remember what had once been. The thought pressed on her, heavy and inescapable. Her skills had become so refined that survival felt almost effortless, yet she knew it could never be guaranteed. One misstep, a broken tool, a missed tide, a storm more violent than expected, could be fatal. Every day was a negotiation with the island, a careful balance between ambition and caution. She had learned to read the subtle signs in the rocks and the sand, to predict the movements of predators, to recognize the telltale signs of fish and shellfish abundance. Every observation, every adjustment, was a thread in the web that kept her alive. Despite her competence, moments of despair were never far. There were nights when the wind screamed and the cliff shook under its force, and she felt smaller than ever, a single human against the vastness of the ocean. There were days when the sea seemed endless and empty, reflecting her own isolation. She would sing, carve, and talk to the animals, but the ache for human contact remained, a constant shadow in her mind. Yet even in her solitude, she noticed signs that she was not entirely alone in the world. Driftwood sometimes bore marks that she could not explain. Objects floated ashore from distant lands. And sometimes the horizon carried shapes she could not immediately identify. Could it be other humans? Perhaps passing ships? Or simply the randomness of the ocean? Each hint stirred hope and caution in equal measure. She learned to observe from a distance, to wait and watch, never revealing herself until she felt certain it was safe. Her survival strategies evolved with the years. She discovered which plants could supplement her diet, which birds were easiest to hunt, and how to time her foraging with the tides. She collected and preserved tools carefully, sharpening stones, reinforcing shelters, and creating clothing that could withstand years of wear. Each task required patience and intelligence, and she executed them with a precision born of necessity. The psychological endurance required as much skill as the physical. She maintained her memory through song and ritual, repeating the traditions of her people as if they were lifelines. She made offerings to the spirits of the island, leaving small collections of shells or feathers as markers of passage or gratitude. She imagined conversations with the departed, asking advice, telling stories, seeking connection. In this way, she preserved a sense of identity that the world had tried to erase. As she approached nearly a decade on the island, her life settled into a rhythm that was both predictable and precarious. She had learned to read every nuance of the environment, yet the outside world remained a distant and unknowable presence. She could see the occasional gull or flying fish as hints of life beyond, and she watched storms with both awe and caution. The island was a teacher, a companion, a jailer, and a sanctuary all at once. And yet, the sense that something or someone might one day arrive lingered. Occasionally, she glimpsed faint traces on the horizon, sails, reflections, distant smoke. Each sighting sparked a careful strategy: observe, hide, and determine whether the unknown would bring life or death. Her instincts, honed over years of survival, guided her through these encounters. Isla's world was now one of cycles, observation, and anticipation. She had become both master and student of the island, a solitary figure shaped by nature, memory, and resilience. Her life was measured not in conventional milestones, but in storms weathered, food gathered, tools sharpened, and song sung. And in these cycles, a quiet tension remained, a sense that the story of Isla, the last survivor of her people, was not yet complete. Somewhere beyond the horizon, perhaps, the world still moved. Perhaps someone might come. Perhaps a future awaited her that she could not yet imagine. The island held her, shaped her, and tested her, but also left open the possibility of discovery. The question that had haunted her since the day she was abandoned remained. Would the world ever remember her? Or would she remain the solitary witness of a lost people, unseen and unknown, until the end of her days? For now, she endured meticulously, masterfully, surviving day by day. She had transformed fear into knowledge, despair into ritual, isolation into mastery. And though the future remained uncertain, she had proven one immutable truth. She would not vanish quietly. She would endure, and the world, whether it knew it or not, would one day take notice of her existence. Years of silence and solitude had honed Isla into a figure both resilient and cautious. Every sound, every movement across the cliffs, every ripple in the water was scrutinized. She had learned the island's rhythms so well that nothing escaped her notice. Yet, despite her mastery, the horizon still carried a question she could neither answer nor ignore. Would anyone ever come for her, or would she remain alone until her last breath? One morning, as the sun rose pale and silver over the Pacific, Isla noticed something unusual. A faint reflection glimmered on the water, too regular to be natural, too deliberate to be a trick of sunlight. For a moment, she froze, her heart beating in anticipation and fear. Could it be a ship? A human presence? Cautiously, she observed from the cliffs, hidden among rocks and grasses she knew would shield her from view. The shape moved, closer now, cutting through the waves with precision and purpose. Her instincts sharpened, honed over years of solitude. She was about to be seen, or to see. The vessel was small, a boat used for hunting sea otters along the California coast, and its crew had no idea of the island's lone inhabitant. They were drawn to the island by rumors, faint signs of habitation, perhaps smoke from a long-extinguished fire, footprints along the shore, or discarded tools. They moved methodically, landing and exploring, leaving no stone unturned. Isla watched silently, assessing them, calculating whether approach or concealment would keep her alive. By evening, they had begun to pack up, their work yielding only traces, shelters, empty shells, and carefully arranged stones. Isla, driven by curiosity and a quiet hope, approached. She carried with her a small offering, roasted wild onions, gathered carefully from the island. The gesture was simple, yet profound, a bridge between worlds without shared language or customs. The men saw her emerge, cautious and unthreatening, her clothing stitched from feathers and hides, her hair wild from wind and sun. Communication was impossible in words. Isla spoke none of their language, and they could not understand hers. Yet understanding passed between them in gestures, in offerings, in careful observation. The men were awed by her appearance, by the evidence of survival carved into every line of her body, every tool she carried, every structure she had built. Here was a human who had endured 18 years alone, mastering an island no one else had survived. The decision to leave the island was mutual, though one of necessity rather than desire. Isla had seen the mainland only in distant memory, glimpsed from the cliff's edge in imagination. She was curious, cautious, but prepared to trust these strangers. She allowed herself to be led onto the boat, leaving behind the only home she had known for nearly 2 decades. The journey to Santa Barbara was bewildering. Isla had never encountered the density of human life, the constant movement, the noise, and the smells of civilization. She examined everything with silent curiosity, the buildings, the animals, the tools, and the people themselves. Every object was strange, every sound unfamiliar. Yet she met it all with calm observation, as if the world had changed, but she had not. Within weeks, her body began to falter. Her digestive system, accustomed to the narrow, protein-heavy diet of the island, struggled with the abundance and variety of mainland food. Her immune system, tuned to the isolated bacteria and conditions of San Nicolas, could not withstand the pathogens she encountered. Dysentery and illness followed swiftly, reminding her that survival was as fragile as it was remarkable. Before her death, she was baptized by a Franciscan priest, given the Spanish name Hannah Maria, the only identity ever officially recorded in history. The ceremony was brief, conducted without full understanding of her past, her language, or the life she had led. And within weeks, she succumbed to illness, her body finally unable to reconcile the extremes of isolation and civilization. Her burial was quiet, unremarkable, and largely anonymous. She was laid to rest in an unmarked grave at the Santa Barbara Mission Cemetery, surrounded by strangers who could not comprehend the language, culture, or experiences she carried. A brief record noted only that she had been a native woman brought from San Nicolas Island, baptized shortly before death, and buried. For decades, her resting place went unnoticed. Yet her story did not disappear entirely. Archaeologists visiting San Nicolas Island discovered the tools, shelters, and remnants she had left behind, evidence of a life lived with intelligence, skill, and quiet determination. Whalebone structures, bone needles, carefully stitched clothing, and food remains all told a story of survival, ingenuity, and resilience. These artifacts were a testament to her existence, proof that she had endured, not as myth or legend, but as a living human being solving practical problems day after day. Her story resurfaced in literature decades later, most famously in Scott Odell's Island of the Blue Dolphins, a fictionalized retelling of her life. Readers were captivated by the mystery, the endurance, and a remarkable mastery of a woman who had lived alone for nearly 2 decades. Yet the truth remained far more powerful than fiction. Hannah Maria, known in her own language as Isla, had been the last living witness of the Nicolino people, a guardian of their culture, memory, and knowledge. Her survival was not a tale of triumph or glory. It was a story of endurance in the face of abandonment, of memory preserved in isolation, of humanity maintained when the world turned away. She did not seek heroism. She sought simply to live, to maintain a thread of continuity with a world that had nearly erased her existence. Each day, each action, was a refusal to vanish, a declaration that she mattered, even if no one else recognized it. The irony of her final weeks underscores the fragility of human life. 18 years alone, surviving storm, scarcity, and solitude, only to perish within weeks of returning to society. Her resilience, honed over nearly 2 decades, had left her unprepared for the abundance and dangers of a world she had never known. Yet in that brief period, she also encountered connection, however tenuous, with others, a reminder that her story was not entirely solitary. Hannah Maria's legacy endures in the artifacts, the records, and the stories inspired by her life. She stands as a testament to the extraordinary limits of human endurance, the fragility of culture in the face of colonial disruption, and the power of the human spirit to persist even when the world has forgotten. She remains an emblem of survival, memory, and the quiet strength it takes to remain human when everything else has vanished. Her life asks unsettling questions. How do we remember those who are forgotten? How do we honor the endurance of the isolated, the displaced, and the erased? And perhaps most profoundly, what does it mean to survive when the world seems determined to forget you? Isla's story, revealed to the silence she left behind, reminds us that survival is not merely about escaping danger, but about refusing to disappear, about preserving identity, memory, and humanity against impossible odds. She chose to live day after day, season after season, in a world that had abandoned her, and that choice, repeated without witnesses, remains one of the most compelling acts of human resilience ever recorded. Even as history almost forgot her, the island remembers the tools, the shelters, the marks in the earth. They speak of a life lived fully against every possible obstacle. They remind us that even in isolation, humanity finds ways to endure, to adapt, and to assert its presence against the indifference of the world. Her story ends in mortality, but begins anew every time it is told. Isla, the woman left alone for 18 years, becomes a symbol not of despair, but of refusal, mastery, and the enduring human spirit. Her silence, once absolute, now speaks across time, carrying a message of resilience, courage, and the profound strength of a single human being standing alone against the forces of nature, history, and forgetfulness.